Is this a twist of fate or a lesson life is trying to teach me? How should I react? I see it as a valuable lesson, accept it with gratitude, and choose to move forward. 3 days after my fourth miscarriage, my younger sister moved into our guest room to help me recover. 6 weeks later, I found her 12-week ultrasound under the passenger seat of my husband's car. She had already been pregnant the day she sat beside my hospital bed, held my hand, and promised me I would be a mother someday. At first, I thought the ultrasound had slipped out of her purse. Then I checked the camera in our garage, and I saw exactly what Lauren had done. She hadn't lost it. She wanted me to find it. And that wasn't even the worst thing hiding in that car. The morning of my miscarriage started with a phone call from the fertility clinic at 7:46. I remember the exact time because I'd been staring at the clock since 5, waiting for the nurse to tell me whether my hormone levels were rising. They weren't. The transfer had failed, and my body was already letting go. The nurse kept talking in that soft, careful voice medical people use when they know there's nothing useful left to say. "I'm so sorry, Rachel. Dr. Patel wants you to come in this morning." I said, "Okay," like she just reminded me about a dentist appointment. Then I hung up and sat on the edge of the bed with my phone still in my hand. Mark was in the shower. I could hear him humming. That stupid detail stayed with me. I was losing another baby, and my husband was humming through the bathroom wall. When he came out, I told him. He froze for maybe 2 seconds, wrapped a towel around his waist, and said, "Damn it, are they sure?" "They're sure." He rubbed both hands over his face. "Okay, we'll go in, we'll figure it out." We. He always said we when there was bad news, like the right pronoun could make us feel married again. By then, we'd been through 4 years of appointments, injections, blood draws, procedures, hope. And the kind of disappointment that makes your own house feel unfamiliar. We barely touched unless a doctor had put it on a calendar. We barely talked unless it was about money or medication. But that morning, I still believed we were on the same side. At the clinic, Mark sat beside me scrolling through his phone while I answered questions. The nurse asked about pain, bleeding, dizziness. Mark looked up only when his phone buzzed a second time. He turned the screen away so fast it almost looked like a reflex. I noticed it, but I was too tired to care. That's the thing about being exhausted. People can do shady stuff right in front of you, and your brain just files it under later. Lauren arrived before the doctor did. She came rushing into the room carrying a tote bag, her hair still damp, her face full of concern. "Oh my God, Ratch." She dropped the bag, leaned over me, and hugged me so tightly I could smell her shampoo. "I'm so sorry." I started crying then, not when the nurse called, not when Mark said we'd figure it out. I cried when my sister held me, because Lauren had always known how to make me feel safe. She sat beside me through the exam, rubbed circles on my back, and told Mark to go get coffee because, in her words, "You're making her more nervous pacing around like that." Mark gave her a look I didn't understand at the time. Not anger, not exactly, more like a warning. Lauren looked away first. I thought they were both worried about me. Yeah. That's what I thought. After the doctor confirmed the loss, Lauren drove me home while Mark said he needed to stop by the office. "Just for an hour," he told me. "I have a client thing I can't move." Lauren stared at him. "Seriously, today? It's not optional. Neither is your wife." I remember looking between them and feeling grateful that somebody was willing to call him out for me. I had no idea I was watching two people manage the same lie from opposite sides. 3 days later, Lauren showed up at our house with 2 suitcases and a box of groceries. She didn't ask. She walked straight into the kitchen, started unloading soup, crackers, tea, and the expensive yogurt I liked, and said, "I'm staying in the guest room until you can get through an entire day without apologizing for being sad." I tried to argue. "You have work. I can work from here. You have your own apartment. It'll survive." Mark stood in the doorway with his arms crossed. "Maybe Rachel needs space." Lauren turned around. "Maybe Rachel needs someone who's actually here." The room went quiet. I expected Mark to get defensive, but he just looked at her for a long second and said, "Fine, whatever helps." Lauren smiled at me. See, settled. For the next 6 weeks, she played the perfect sister. She brought me tea before I asked. She kept track of my medication. She changed the sheets when I couldn't get out of bed. She sat on the bathroom floor outside the door when I cried in the shower and pretended not to hear. When our mother called and said, "Maybe your body is trying to tell you something," Lauren took the phone out of my hand and said, "Mom, stop talking." Then she hung up. I trusted her more than anyone. More than Mark, if I'm being honest, and she knew it. Mark started working late almost every night. He said his company was in the middle of a major deal. Sometimes he came home at 10, sometimes midnight. He'd kiss my forehead, ask if I'd eaten, and then go straight to the shower. Lauren always seemed to know when he'd be late before I did. "Don't wait up for him," she'd say. "He texted you?" I asked once. She blinked, then reached for her water. "No, I just heard him mention it this morning." I let it go. There were a lot of things I let go back then. Little things. A coffee cup in the sink that wasn't mine. Lauren wearing perfume at breakfast. Mark suddenly locking his phone. A charge from a downtown restaurant on our joint card when he'd told me he ate at his desk. Each detail was small enough to explain away. Together, they were a siren. I just wasn't listening yet. The day I found the ultrasound, Lauren was sitting at the kitchen island answering emails. She had one hand pressed against her stomach, but when she saw me looking, she moved it. "Hey," she said, casual as anything, "I think I left my phone charger in Mark's car. Could you grab it? I'm in the middle of something." I should have told her to get it herself. The garage was 20 feet away, but I was trying to be useful again, trying to prove I wasn't as fragile as everyone thought, so I took Mark's keys from the bowl by the door and walked outside. His car smelled like leather, old coffee, and the cedar air freshener he always bought. I opened the passenger door and checked the center console. No charger. I leaned down to look under the seat, and that's when I saw the white corner of an envelope. The logo on the front was from a women's imaging center across town. My first thought was that it belonged to me. For one stupid second, I thought maybe it was an old scan Mark had kept. Then I pulled it out and saw the name, Lauren Collins, my sister. The ultrasound was dated 4 days earlier. 12 weeks, 3 days. I read it once, then again. Then I did the math on my fingers because my brain refused to do it for me. 12 weeks. She had been 6 weeks pregnant the day she held my hand in the hospital. 6 weeks pregnant when she cried with me. 6 weeks pregnant when she promised I'd get my turn. I stared at the grainy black and white image until the numbers blurred. There was a tiny shape in the center. A baby, her baby. I still didn't let myself think Mark. Not yet. I told myself there could be another man. There had to be another man. Then I saw the second envelope. It had Mark's name on it, along with the address of a family law office in Chicago. Inside was a business card and a packet of documents clipped together. The first page said Home Equity Authorization. The second page listed my address. My house. The house my grandmother had left me before I married Mark. I flipped through too fast to understand everything, but I saw his name, my name, a loan amount of $225,000, and a yellow sticky note that said, "Need Rachel's signature before Tuesday." My hands started shaking so hard the papers rattled. That was the moment I understood the ultrasound wasn't the only secret in that car. Whatever Mark and Lauren were doing, it involved my marriage, my house. And a deadline I knew nothing about. I pulled out my phone and photographed every page, every signature line, every date. Then I photographed the ultrasound. I put everything back exactly where I found it, including the angle of the envelope under the seat. When I walked into the kitchen, Lauren didn't look at the charger in my hand. She looked at my face. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," I said, "just got a little lightheaded." Her eyes stayed on me. "Did you find it?" "Right where you said it was." She smiled, but only with her mouth. "Thanks." That evening, Mark came home at 8:17. I know because I was watching the microwave clock when he walked in. He kissed the top of my head and set his keys on the counter. How was your day? Quiet. Lauren behaving herself? She's been wonderful. Lauren was standing by the sink with her back to us. Her shoulders tightened. Mark opened the refrigerator, then glanced at me. Did she find her charger? I did. He paused. Did you find anything else? The question came out too quickly. I looked straight at him. Was I supposed to? He laughed, but it sounded off. No, I just mean my car's a mess. It looked pretty organized to me. Lauren dropped a spoon. It hit the sink with a sharp metal crack. Nobody moved for a second. Then she said, "Sorry, slippery hands." I smiled at her. You should be careful. Neither of them knew what I knew, but both of them were scared I might. After dinner, I went upstairs, locked the bedroom door, and sent the photos to a new email account Mark didn't know existed. Then I remembered the garage camera. We'd installed it 2 years earlier after someone stole a bike from our driveway. The camera pointed directly at the passenger side of Mark's car. I opened the security app and scrolled back to that afternoon. At 1:42, Lauren walked into the garage alone. She opened Mark's passenger door. She took the ultrasound from the pocket of her sweater, slid it beneath the seat, and adjusted it so the corner would be visible. Then she looked directly at the camera, not past it, at it. 20 minutes later, she came into the kitchen and asked me to get her charger. I watched the clip 3 times. Lauren hadn't made a mistake. She had set a trap. The only question was whether the trap was meant for me or for my husband. The ultrasound stayed in my jacket pocket for 3 days before I told Olivia. I didn't sleep those nights. I just sat in the dark of my bedroom, holding the grainy black and white image, running through every possible explanation that didn't destroy my entire life. Maybe Lauren was just careless. Maybe she'd had a scan for some other reason. Maybe the date was wrong. But my brain kept circling back to the same answer, and every time I arrived there, my stomach turned so hard I had to press my palm against my mouth to keep from being sick. The 21st week wasn't a mistake. Lauren had been pregnant for more than 5 months by the time I found that ultrasound. She'd been pregnant the whole 6 weeks she'd lived in my house, bringing me tea and changing my sheets, and sitting on my bathroom floor while I fell apart in the shower. She'd known I was mourning another failed transfer while her own baby was growing inside her. And Mark must have known too. There was no way around that. The ultrasound had been under his passenger seat in the car he drove every single day. He had to have seen it. He had to have known it was there. And whoever had put it there had done so intentionally. I kept replaying the moment I found it. I'd been looking for my sunglasses, leaning across the seat, my hand brushing against a piece of paper that felt thicker than regular mail. When I pulled it out and saw what it was, I'd stopped breathing for what felt like a full minute. The date was printed in the corner. The name on the top said Lauren Walsh. I'd sat there in the passenger seat of my own car, staring at the image of my sister's baby, and I realized that the world I'd been living in for the past 4 years wasn't real. It wasn't just that my marriage was broken. It was that my marriage had never actually been what I thought it was. The ultrasound had been placed there deliberately, and I wasn't entirely sure by who. I needed to know the truth before I confronted anyone, because once I started asking questions, there was no going back. I called Olivia Grant on a Tuesday morning. She'd been my attorney for 7 years, ever since I'd inherited the house from my grandmother and needed help with the estate paperwork. Olivia was sharp, patient, and completely immune to emotional manipulation. She was exactly what I needed. I told her I'd found something in Mark's car that made me question a lot of things. I didn't tell her about Lauren yet. I wasn't ready to say those words out loud. Olivia came to the house 3 hours later. I showed her the ultrasound and explained where I'd found it. She looked at it for a long moment, then looked at me. "You know what this means. I know what it might mean." "Rachel," she leaned forward. "This doesn't just mean your sister is pregnant. This means your husband has been lying to you in ways you haven't even started to understand. That was when I finally let myself cry, not the quiet sobbing I'd done in the bathroom. I mean the loud, ugly, broken crying that makes your whole body hurt. Olivia held my hand and let me get it out. When I finally stopped, she asked me what I wanted to do. I said, I want to know exactly how long this has been going on, and I want to know what else they've been hiding. Olivia nodded. Then we need to be patient. We started with the camera in the garage. I'd installed it 6 months earlier after someone had broken into the neighbor's car. I'd never told Mark about it because it was just a little security camera on the shelf near the door. I thought it was recording motion only, but when Olivia checked the footage, we found that it had been continuously recording for weeks. We scrolled through hundreds of hours of grayish video, watching Mark come and go, Lauren walking to her car, occasional late-night visitors. The night before I found the ultrasound, Lauren had pulled into the garage around 11 o'clock. Mark's car was already there. She got out, walked to the driver's side of Mark's car, and opened the door. She didn't go in right away. She stood there for a moment, looking toward the house. Then bent down and put something in the passenger seat. When she straightened up, she adjusted her shirt, smoothed down her hair, and went inside. I couldn't see her face clearly, but I could see how careful she was being. She'd planned exactly what she was doing. She wanted me to find the ultrasound, and she wanted me to find it in Mark's car. For the next 2 days, I didn't confront anyone. I pretended everything was normal, which was harder than I'd expected because normal felt like a foreign language. Mark came home at 9, ate the dinner I made for him, and asked how I was feeling. I said, better, and watched his face to see if he looked relieved or worried. He looked a little of both. Lauren came downstairs and asked if I wanted to watch a movie. I said, maybe later, and watched her smile fade just slightly when she realized I wasn't playing along. She'd been so good at being the perfect sister that she probably thought I'd be grateful for her company forever. But I was starting to notice the small things. The way she glanced at Mark's phone when he left it on the counter. The way she mentioned his name more often than was natural. The way she'd referred to my mother as our mom instead of just mom, like she was marking territory. These details had always been invisible to me. Now they were neon. I started keeping a journal of everything I observed. Not because I wanted to be paranoid, but because I needed to see the pattern in writing. April 3rd, Lauren wore a sweater that was too warm for the weather and kept her arms crossed over her chest all through breakfast. April 5th, Mark came home with a grocery bag that contained only organic vegetables, which he never bought unless I asked. And when I mentioned it, he said he'd been thinking about eating healthier. I asked if he'd taken a cooking class, and he laughed too fast and said no. April 7th, Lauren spent 20 minutes on the phone in the backyard with her back to the house. I saw her laughing in a way she hadn't laughed since she arrived. She wasn't laughing at anything I could hear. April 9th, I heard Mark singing in the shower again. That was the morning I realized he'd been singing almost every day for the past 3 weeks. Even when I was lying in bed feeling like my body had failed me again, I'd been too wrapped up in my own grief to notice he wasn't grieving with me. He was relieved. A man who's about to become a father for the first time doesn't mourn a failed transfer. He just makes sure the timing works out. The second week of my investigation, Olivia came back with a preliminary financial report. Mark's business, a small import company he'd started 3 years earlier, had been losing money for the past 18 months. He'd been covering the losses with personal funds, but those funds were getting low. More importantly, he'd been transferring money into a separate account I didn't know about. The account was in the name of a shell company. Olivia couldn't trace the ultimate beneficiary yet, but she found a connection to a real estate developer who'd been trying to buy up properties in our neighborhood. Our house was worth nearly $2 million. It was the single biggest asset I owned. I'd inherited it from my grandmother, who told me on her deathbed to never let anyone take it from me. I'd promised her I wouldn't. I started to wonder if Mark had made a different promise to someone else. I didn't confront anyone yet because I needed more proof, and I was still holding out hope that there was some innocent explanation for all of it. Maybe Mark was just bad with money. Maybe Lauren was just keeping a secret to protect me. Maybe I was reading too much into things because I'd been traumatized. But every time I tried to come up with an excuse, I remembered the date on the ultrasound, and I realized that no amount of goodwill could explain that timeline. Lauren had gotten pregnant while I was miscarrying. She'd known about it the whole time she was sitting beside me at the clinic. That wasn't an accident. That was a choice. The third week of my investigation, I finally caught a break. Lauren had been asleep for hours. And Mark was still out at one of his business dinners, so I decided to check the shared computer in the office. Mark and I had never been careful about separating our devices. We used the same login, the same passwords, the same everything, because we were married and I didn't think I needed to hide anything from him. That was stupid, but it was also useful now. The office computer had an old backup folder that contained voice recordings from a few months earlier. I'd used it to record some client interviews for a project I'd been working on before the pregnancy took over my life. But when I opened the folder, I found more than my own recordings. There were voice messages from Lauren. I clicked on the first one and my sister's voice filled the room. "I left the ultrasound in your car. I'm done waiting. If Rachel finds it, you'll finally have to choose." My blood went cold. I clicked the next file and Mark's voice replied, "Are you insane? You could ruin everything before she signs." Lauren said, "You keep saying one more week. One more appointment, one more document. I'm carrying your child, Mark. I'm not hiding forever." I had to sit down. The chair rolled out from under me. And I ended up on the floor with my back against the desk, listening to the rest of the recordings. Mark told Lauren they'd have the house, the money, and a new life as soon as I signed a simple financial agreement. He said I was so broken after the miscarriage that I'd sign anything to make myself feel better. He said the lawyer would explain the documents in a way I'd understand. He said I'd be so grateful for his support that I wouldn't even question what I was signing. Lauren said, "She's your wife." Mark said, "She's not the one I'm having a child with." I listened to that sentence 3 times, and every time it knocked the air out of my lungs. He'd been sleeping with my sister for at least a year. He'd been planning to take my house and my money while pretending to support me through a fertility nightmare. And Lauren had been helping him, not because she was guilty, but because she wanted him to leave me faster. She'd planted the ultrasound because she was tired of waiting for him to choose her. She didn't want to ruin my marriage. She wanted to force Mark to end it. The betrayal was so complete that I couldn't even process it all at once. I sat on the floor for a long time, replaying conversations in my head, reimagining every moment of the past 6 weeks with the knowledge of what was really happening. The soup, the tea, the bathroom floor. Every single act of kindness had been part of a campaign to make me feel safe so I wouldn't look too closely at what they were doing. And it had worked. It had worked so well that I'd trusted my sister more than I'd ever trusted anyone. That was the hardest part to swallow. Not that Mark had cheated. Not that Lauren had betrayed me. But that I'd been so completely fooled by both of them that I'd practically handed them the keys to my life. I copied all the recordings onto a USB drive, then deleted my access logs and went back to my room. My hands were shaking, but I forced myself to breathe slowly. I couldn't fall apart. Not yet. There was too much at stake. I sent a message to Olivia with the subject line, "Proceed." She didn't reply, but I knew she would start putting things in motion. The financial freeze, the document review, the preparations for whatever came next. I didn't know exactly what Mark was planning to make me sign, but I was going to find out, and I was going to make sure he regretted every single lie he'd ever told me. The next few days were a masterclass in acting. I smiled at Lauren when she came down for breakfast. I thanked Mark for the flowers he'd brought home, even though I knew they were a peace offering from the ultrasound conversation. I asked about his work and pretended to be interested in the answers. I ate dinner with both of them and laughed at their jokes and said goodnight like I was the same woman I'd been before I found that piece of evidence. But I was watching everything. The way Mark's hand lingered a second too long on Lauren's shoulder when he passed her in the kitchen. The way she looked at him when she thought I wasn't paying attention. The way they both deferred to me in conversation, like I was the delicate one who needed to be protected from life. The cruelty of that irony was almost too much to bear. They were protecting themselves from the consequences of their own choices, and they were using my grief as a shield. I started taking notes on my phone, just tiny observations that I could reference later. Mark texted someone at 2:00 a.m. Lauren's bag was in the garage when she said she'd been inside all day. They exchanged a look over dinner that lasted 3 seconds too long. Small things that built a bigger picture. The picture was ugly, and it was getting uglier by the day. On the Sunday before the signing, our mother came over for dinner. Diane had never been the most sensitive person in the world. She was the kind of mother who told you to get over it when you were sad and try harder when you were struggling. But she loved us in her own way, and she always showed up when there was a meal involved. Lauren had cooked dinner, and Diane praised her effusively. "I don't know what Rachel would have done without you," she said. Lauren smiled modestly. "I just wanted to help." "No," Diane said, shaking her head. "You've been a lifesaver. Your sister needed someone who actually showed up for her." I looked at Lauren and said, "Neither do I." Diane didn't notice the weight of that sentence. Lauren did. She looked at me, and for a fraction of a second, her smile flickered. Then she recovered and asked Mom about her garden, and the conversation moved on. But I'd seen it. She knew something was off. She just didn't know how much I knew. Dinner was a minefield of double meanings. Diane asked how I was feeling, and I said better, which I was, in a way, because I was finally taking control of something. She told me I needed to get back to living and be grateful for Mark's patience. Mark looked at me with that concerned husband expression he'd perfected, and I nodded and said I'd been doing a lot of thinking about the future. That caught everyone's attention. "What kind of thinking?" Diane asked. "I've been considering using the house as collateral for one final IVF attempt." The room went still. Mark set down his fork. "I think that's the most sensible thing you've said in months." I looked at him. "You think risking the house is sensible?" "Not risking it," he said quickly. Investing in our future." Lauren glanced at him. "Maybe Rachel needs more time." Mark's response was sharp. "This is between me and my wife." He never talked to Lauren like that in front of me. The tension crackled between them, and I watched them both realize they'd stepped too close to the edge. Lauren looked away first. Mark picked up his fork and started eating again like nothing had happened. I took a sip of wine and said, "You both want what's best for me. That makes me feel very safe." Mark smiled, but his eyes were calculating. Lauren said nothing. Diane was oblivious, talking about the neighbor who'd just gotten married and how we should all be so lucky. She had no idea her family was imploding around her. I let the conversation run its course and excused myself as soon as I could. That night, Mark brought me the documents he'd been preparing. It was a thick packet, and he placed it on the kitchen counter with a ceremony that felt rehearsed. "These are just the usual papers for the loan and the clinic," he said. "You don't need to read every page. The notary will explain the important parts. And you've read everything?" "Of course." I looked at him. "Then I trust you." The words felt like glass in my mouth. Mark nodded, kissed my forehead, and left the room. I stayed at the counter for another hour, flipping through the pages. The credit agreement was straightforward enough. But buried in the middle was a section that made me stop breathing: financial power of attorney. It gave Mark the right to manage my accounts, sell my assets, and make financial decisions on my behalf if I was deemed emotionally incapable of making them myself. The language was vague. There was no medical threshold, No second opinion requirement. Just a statement that I'd agreed to it willingly, which my signature would confirm. I hadn't asked for any of that, and the document wasn't from the clinic or the bank. It was drafted by a law firm I'd never heard of, and it was dated 3 weeks earlier. I took photos of every page. Then I put everything back in the packet and waited. The next morning, I told Olivia we had enough. She'd already begun building the case against Mark's company. She'd also found another detail that made everything even worse. The IVF money I'd been spending for the past 4 years hadn't all gone to treatment. Some of it had been funneled into an account that paid for Lauren's apartment rent and utilities. Mark had been supporting my sister while I was spending thousands of dollars trying to have his child. He'd been using my fertility fund to pay for her lifestyle. He'd been doing it for months. Lauren didn't even know. She'd believed the money came from his business, which made her complicit in a different way. She'd been sleeping with my husband and taking his money and pretending to be my caretaker. She had no idea he was stealing from me to do it. I kept that piece of information to myself. I didn't want to reveal it until I could watch her face when she learned the full truth. Olivia asked me if I was ready to take the next step. I said I'd been ready for years. I just hadn't known it. Wednesday was the day of the signing. I woke up early, showered, dressed carefully, and ate breakfast alone. Mark came down looking nervous but trying to project calm. "Are you feeling okay?" he asked. "Fine," I said. "Ready?" "Good, that's good." He refilled his coffee and didn't meet my eyes. Lauren appeared a few minutes later. She'd put on a dress I'd never seen before, something soft and flowy that could easily have been a maternity dress. She sat across from me and made small talk about the weather and the traffic. I watched her hands. They were steady. She wasn't nervous. She was excited. She thought this was the end. She thought I'd sign the papers, Mark would leave me, and they'd ride off into the sunset with my house and my money. I smiled at her and said, "Thanks for everything you've done these past few weeks." "Of course," she said. "You're my sister." She believed that. She believed she was doing the right thing, and that was the most terrifying part of all. The title office was in a strip mall off the highway, sandwiched between a dry cleaner and a tire shop. It was a strange place to finalize the destruction of my marriage, but I guess betrayal doesn't always happen in dramatic settings. Sometimes it happens in fluorescent lighting with stale coffee smell and a notary who doesn't know she's witnessing a crime. Mark held my hand as we walked in. "After today, everything will finally get easier," he said. "For whom?" I asked. He squeezed my fingers. "For us." I didn't pull my hand away. I wanted him to think everything was normal. I wanted him to see me as the broken, trusting wife he'd been manipulating for years. It took everything I had to keep the smile on my face, but I did it because I knew what was coming, and I wanted him to be completely unprepared. The conference room was small and windowless. There was a long table with 7 chairs around it, a pot of bad coffee, and a notary named Mrs. Denton who looked like she'd done this 1,000 times and didn't care about any of it. She had gray hair, reading glasses on a chain, and the kind of face that didn't register surprise or emotion. She was the perfect audience for what I was about to do. Mark sat beside me, close enough that his knee pressed against mine under the table. Lauren was waiting in the car. I'd asked her to come along for moral support, and she'd agreed, thinking it would be a front row seat to her victory. She had no idea the show was about her, not me. Mrs. Denton spread the documents across the table and started going through them one by one: the loan agreement, the collateral statement, the financial power of attorney. Every page had a place for my signature, and Mark kept pointing to them like I couldn't read. "Sign here, honey." He used endearments when he was nervous. "Here's the next line. And here. And this one, the notary will initial it." I didn't move my pen. I just looked at the pages and waited for the right moment. "Mrs. Bennett," the notary said, "do you understand that the property will secure this loan?" Mark answered for me. "We've discussed everything." I asked her, Mrs. Denton said. Mark, shut up. I turned the pages slowly, reading every word even though I'd already memorized them. I got to the power of attorney and put my finger on the page. Mark, why does this give you control over my financial accounts? He leaned in. It's standard language. Every loan like this includes a provision for the spouse. And why does it mention emotional incapacity? He blinked. Rachel, this isn't the place. Actually, I said, looking at the notary, this is exactly the place. I took a slow breath and looked at Mark. I didn't come here to sign your loan. I came here to watch you explain why you forged my name. The room went quiet. Mark's smile froze on his face. What are you talking about? There's a document in this packet, I said, that has my signature already on it, the initialed version. Except I've never signed that page, and I've never agreed to give you power of attorney. So either you forged my name, or someone else did it on your behalf. Which is it? Mark started to speak, but the door opened, and Olivia Grant walked in. She was wearing a dark suit and carrying a briefcase. Her expression was calm, professional, and completely devastating. She placed her case on the table, opened it, and started pulling out documents. Copies of the bank statements, copies of the voice recordings, copies of the forged documents. The official notice that all joint accounts had been frozen pending investigation, the separation agreement, the lawsuit for financial fraud. Mark went pale. What the hell is this? This, Olivia said, is the beginning of your divorce. Rachel has already retained me as her counsel. You are not to contact her directly. All communication will go through me. The house is her separate property, as you've known since the day you married her. And it cannot be used for collateral without her consent, which she is not giving. Mark stood up. You can't do this. I can, Olivia said, and I am. Mrs. Denton looked between all of us and slowly closed her file. I think this meeting is over. No, Mark said. Sit down, we're going to figure this out. We're not figuring anything out, I said. I've known about you and Lauren for 2 weeks, Mark. I found the ultrasound she left in your car. I found the recordings you made of her voice. I know you've been planning to take my house and my money while pretending to support me through fertility treatment. I know you've been paying her rent with my IVF fund. I know everything. Mark stared at me like I'd just hit him with a brick. You don't know everything. Then tell me what I'm missing. He opened his mouth, closed it, and shook his head. This is insane. You're insane. You've been through so much trauma that you're not thinking clearly. I laughed. I couldn't help it. That sentence is the reason Olivia is here, because you've been telling everyone I'm emotionally unstable. And you've been using my grief to plan the theft of my life. You're not worried about me, Mark. You're worried about getting caught. He looked at Olivia. You can't let her do this. I'm not letting her do anything, Olivia said. I'm representing her interests, which you've been attempting to defraud for months. The door opened again. Lauren walked in with a confused expression that slowly shifted into confusion. Mark, what's happening? I looked at her. He was about to take a loan against my house. You said she agreed, Lauren said to Mark. Stay out of this, he snapped. No, I said. Lauren, you worked very hard to get into this room. The least you can do is stay for the ending. I pulled out my phone and played the video from the garage. The grainy footage showed Lauren opening Mark's car door, leaning in, and carefully placing something in the passenger seat. She straightened her shirt and walked toward the house. I paused the video and looked at her. You planted the ultrasound. Her face drained of color. Don't say you didn't mean for me to find it. I kept my voice steady. Don't say you felt guilty. You planted it because you wanted me to find it. You wanted Mark to have to choose. You were tired of hiding. Mark turned on Lauren. You planted it. You left me no choice. You could have destroyed everything. You kept promising you would choose me, Lauren said. One more week, one more appointment, one more document. I've been hearing that for months. I'm carrying your child, and you've been stringing me along like I'm some kind of backup plan. She didn't plant it because she felt guilty, I said. She planted it because you wouldn't leave fast enough. Lauren looked at me, and her expression shifted from defensive to pleading. He told me your marriage was already over. Then why, I asked, did you sit beside me while I lost his baby? Lauren started to cry. It was a real cry, not a performance. I could see the tears streaming down her face, and some part of me felt like I should comfort her. But the part of me that remembered her holding my hand at the clinic was stronger. I didn't mean for it to happen this way, she said. You brought soup to my house while you were pregnant by my husband, I said. Exactly what way did you think it would happen? Mark tried to take control of the conversation. Lauren manipulated both of us, Rachel. This whole thing was her idea. She came after me. She convinced me that you and I weren't working. She made promises she couldn't keep. No, I said. You both made choices. You're only calling it manipulation because the choices finally have consequences. But I didn't forgive you, Mark, and I didn't forgive her. I gave you both the same chance. You both took it and made it worse. Lauren looked at Mark. You told me this was going to be easy. It was supposed to be easy. Nothing about this is easy, I said. Olivia picked up a document and turned to Lauren. I need to show you something. She laid out the financial records showing the flow of money from my IVF account to the shell company that paid Lauren's rent. Mark didn't plan to leave you anything, Olivia said. He planned to use you both. The money he promised you for a new life was being taken from your sister's fertility treatment. You were paying for your own apartment with her medical expenses, and you didn't even know it. Lauren looked at the papers like they were written in another language. You told me the money came from your business. It doesn't matter where it came from, Mark said. It mattered when I was injecting hormones into my body while you were using that money to pay her rent, I said. My voice cracked on the last word, but I forced myself to keep going. It mattered when I was crying in the shower and she was sitting on the bathroom floor pretending to care about me. It mattered when I was losing our child and you were planning your escape with my sister. Mark looked at me with something that might have been regret. Rachel, I never meant to hurt you. You mean you never meant for me to find out? That's not fair. Fair, I repeated. You want to talk about fair? I grabbed the forged documents and held them up. You've been planning to take everything from me, my house, my money, my future, and you think fair is something you get to ask for? The room was silent for a moment. The notary was gone. It was just me, Olivia, Mark, and Lauren standing around a table covered in evidence. Mark finally spoke. What do you want from me? I want you to leave my house, I said. I want you to never contact me again. I want you to deal with the legal consequences of what you've done. And I want you to live with the fact that you destroyed your own life because you couldn't be honest about what you wanted. Lauren looked at me. I need to tell you something. No, Mark was planning to use something else against you. Lauren, shut up, Mark said. He recorded your conversations, Lauren said, the ones you had after the miscarriages. He recorded you talking about how you couldn't get out of bed, how you didn't want to see people, how you asked him to handle the finances. He was going to use those recordings to prove you're not competent to manage your own life. I felt the floor tilt under me. What? He wanted to sell the house, Lauren said. He wanted to control your money without your permission. He was going to use your grief as a weapon. Mark reached for her arm. That's enough. No. I said, let her talk. Lauren stepped away from him. There's a recording on Mark's phone. I copied it. He said that after the next failed transfer, you wouldn't fight him. He said once the power of attorney was signed, he could move the equity before you understood what happened. I closed my eyes. You kept a copy? I thought you should know the truth. Why? Because I loved him, Lauren said. And I was stupid enough to believe he loved me back, but I'm not stupid enough to think he was ever going to protect me. I looked at her, and for the first time, I felt something other than anger. I felt pity. She'd been used just as thoroughly as I had, and she'd been so desperate for love that she'd helped destroy her own family to get it. But that didn't make her innocent. It made her collateral damage. You helped him, I said. You helped him hide the affair. You helped him plan the financial takeover. You sat beside me and pretended to be my sister while you were carrying his child. That doesn't go away just because you finally realized he was never going to marry you. Lauren started to say something, then stopped. I want you to leave too, I said. You can go back to the house and get your things. But I don't want to see you for a long time. Rachel, I'm not your sister right now, I said. I'm the woman whose husband you slept with and whose future you tried to steal. If you want to be my sister again someday, you'll have to earn it, and right now I don't know if that's possible. She looked at Mark, then at me, then at the documents spread across the table. She walked out without another word. Mark stayed. I need you to understand. I don't need to understand anything, I said. You'll be hearing from Olivia. I made a mistake. You made a choice, I said, and every choice you made was to protect yourself and your image while you gave me nothing. You don't get to rewrite the story now that the consequences are here. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he followed Lauren out of the room. When they were gone, I sat down heavily in the nearest chair. Olivia closed her briefcase and put a hand on my shoulder. Are you okay? I will be, I said. I think that's the first honest thing I've said in a long time. She nodded. Let's go home. I gave her a list of things to do. File the separation papers, freeze the remaining accounts, start the process for the fraud investigation. Then I went home alone. The house was quiet when I walked in. I could smell the dinner Lauren had started making the night before, still in the refrigerator. I could see Mark's jacket hanging on the hook by the door. Everything looked the same, but everything was different. I went to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of wine, and sat at the table where I'd eaten breakfast with my family the morning before. It was the last meal we'd ever have together, and I didn't miss any of it. The day after the meeting, I didn't get out of bed. It wasn't grief exactly, it was exhaustion. The kind that settles into your bones and makes every movement feel like you're moving through water. I lay there for hours, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the past 4 years in my head. The failed transfers, the quiet nights when Mark came home late, the way Lauren had held my hand at the clinic, the ultrasound under the passenger seat, the recordings, the financial papers. I'd been living a lie for so long that I'd stopped noticing the cracks, but now that I saw them, I couldn't unsee them. Olivia came by around 11. She let herself in, made coffee, and sat on the edge of my bed until I sat up to take a sip. You need to eat, she said. I need to know what happens next. I've already filed the separation papers. The accounts are frozen. I've started the fraud investigation. Mark will have to answer for the financial theft, and the forged documents are going to be a problem for him. What about Lauren? She's not part of the financial investigation, Olivia said. But I've made it clear to her attorney that she needs to stay away from you unless you initiate contact. I don't want to see her. I know. I don't want to talk to her. I know. She's still my sister. I said it quietly, and Olivia nodded. That doesn't change what happened, but it also doesn't mean you have to forgive her. I didn't answer. I just finished my coffee and let Olivia help me out of bed. She stayed for an hour, and I talked about the house and the garden and the plans I'd made before the fertility treatments took over my life. We didn't talk about Mark or Lauren. I wasn't ready for that. I spent the rest of the day walking through the rooms of my home, trying to remember what it felt like to belong here. The kitchen had been the heart of the house once. My grandmother had baked pies there every Sunday, and I'd kept the tradition alive until the miscarriages made everything feel temporary. I'd stopped baking because I didn't want to make a life I couldn't keep. That was the part I hadn't realized until now. The infertility hadn't just taken my chance at motherhood, it had made me afraid to hope for anything. I'd spent 4 years planning for a future that never came, and I'd forgotten how to live in the present. I cleared out the guest room first. It was hard to go through Lauren's things. The clothes she'd left in the closet. The books she'd brought to read. The charge on her phone that I hadn't had the heart to throw away. Every item was a reminder of the lie she'd been living in my house. She'd been pregnant the whole time, wearing baggy sweaters and hiding her belly under flowing tops. She'd been carrying my husband's child while she brought me tea and held my hand and told me everything would be okay. I had to stop thinking about it or I'd never finish. I packed her things into boxes and stacked them in the garage. I'd decide what to do with them later. The room looked different when it was empty. It felt like space, not a holding pattern. I left the door open for the first time in months. That night, Diane called. I knew it was coming. She'd heard from Lauren, and Lauren had told her a version of the story that made her look like a victim of circumstance. I answered the phone and waited. "Rachel, I need to talk to you about something. About Lauren, about the situation." Diane's voice was careful, like she was walking through a room of glass. "I don't know what happened exactly, but your sister is very upset. She should be upset." "Rachel?" Diane's voice shifted to the tone she'd used my whole life, the one that meant I was supposed to be reasonable. "I'm not saying what she did was right, but she's still my daughter and she's about to have a baby and I don't want the family to fall apart. The family fell apart when she slept with my husband. That's not fair." "I know it's not fair," I said, "but I didn't create this situation. She did, and Mark did. I'm just responding to it." Diane was quiet for a moment. "There's a baby coming." "I know. Whatever happened, that child is innocent." So was I. I said it quietly, and Diane was quiet again. "You can support Lauren," I said. "That's your right as her mother, but don't ask me to be okay with what she did, and don't tell me I need to repair the family. I'm not the one who broke it." "You're my daughter too. Then act like it," I said. Diane started to say something else, but I cut her off. "I have to go." I hung up and sat on the couch for a long time. It was the first time I'd ever set a boundary with my mother, and I felt both stronger and emptier for it. The next morning, I started the process of making the house my own again. I threw away the old calendars from the fertility clinic. I packed up the boxes of supplements and medications that had taken over the bathroom cabinet. I cleaned out the freezer, which had been full of pre-made meals for recovery weeks that never came. Every step felt like a small victory. I wasn't getting rid of the hope of having a family. I was getting rid of the expectation that it would happen in a particular way. Mark had left a few things behind. His office was still full of papers and business records. I boxed them up and sent them to his lawyer's office with a note that said, "The rest will be handled through the divorce." I didn't want to see him. I didn't want to hear his voice or remember his face. I just wanted him gone. Lauren's apartment had been paid for through the shell company for over a year. When I canceled the payments, she had 30 days to find another way to cover rent. I didn't ask what she would do. I didn't want to know. I'd started the process of separating my life from hers, and I wasn't going back. The financial investigation took longer than I expected. Mark's company had been losing money for years, and he'd been covering it with personal debt. The shell company was a shell company in the truest sense. It had no actual business, just a bank account that funneled money from my accounts to his. He'd been stealing from me the entire time. The fertility expenses had been astronomical, but I'd been too focused on the medical side to notice the financial side. I'd trusted Mark to handle the bills, and he'd used that trust to build an escape plan. The betrayal had layers. Every time I thought I'd reached the bottom, I found another one. Olivia handled the legal side. She filed motions for temporary support, froze the remaining accounts, and began the process of untangling Mark's business from my personal finances. I spent weeks just waiting. The divorce process was slow and grinding, and I hated every minute of it. But I kept going because I knew the alternative. I knew what it looked like to let someone else control my life, and I never wanted to go back. I saw Lauren once during the whole process. It was at a coffee shop, weeks after the signing. I'd gone for a latte, and she was already there, sitting alone at a table near the window. She looked different. The pregnancy was obvious now, her belly round and full under a soft sweater. She'd put on weight, and her hair was shorter than the last time I'd seen her. For a moment, I thought about leaving. I could have walked out and pretended I hadn't seen her, but I didn't. I walked over to her table and stood there until she looked up. "Rachel," her voice was tentative. "Hi." I didn't sit down. "I need to say something." "Okay." "I'm not ready to forgive you," I said. "I might never be ready to forgive you. But I understand that you were trying to take control of your life in a way that was completely wrong. And I don't think you're a bad person. I think you made choices that hurt me, and I can't undo that." Lauren's eyes filled with tears. "I know. I need you to tell me the truth about Mark," I said. "Not the lies you told yourself, the real truth." She took a deep breath. "I met him when you were starting the second round of treatment. He was at a conference in Chicago. I was there for work. We had dinner, and he told me the marriage was already over, that you and he were staying together for appearances, and that he was going to leave you as soon as the treatment cycle ended. He lied to you." "I know that now." "He never planned to leave me," I said. "He planned to take everything I had and disappear with it. The divorce was never going to be about making a life with you. It was about stealing my life." Lauren looked at me with the expression of someone realizing they'd been played. "He told me we were going to start over together. He told me the same thing, except in my case, he said it was going to be okay and we'd have a family." "How many people did he promise a future to?" She shook her head. "I didn't know about the money. I swear I didn't know he was taking your fertility fund. I thought everything came from his business." "I know." "I don't expect you to believe me." "I don't," I said, "but I believe you didn't know, and that's not forgiveness, that's just acknowledging what happened." Lauren pressed her palm against her belly. "I'm going to be a mother soon." "I know. I don't know how to do it alone." "Neither did I said, "but you'll learn because you don't have a choice." I turned to leave and Lauren said my name. I looked back. "I love you," she said. "I've always loved you. I just didn't love myself enough to do it right." I didn't answer. I walked out of the coffee shop and didn't look back. Mark's divorce lawyer sent an offer a few weeks later. He wanted to settle everything out of court. No admission of guilt. No public acknowledgement of the theft. Just a quiet division of assets and a non-disclosure agreement. I refused it. I wanted the investigation to be public. I wanted him to face the consequences of what he'd done. It wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability. Olivia advised me to settle. She said the process would take years and the legal fees would drain the accounts Mark hadn't already stolen. She said I could get most of what I wanted without the public spectacle. She was right, but I couldn't let it go. I'd spent 4 years letting things go. I'd let the miscarriages happen. I'd let the treatments consume my life. I'd let Mark handle the money and Lauren handle my emotions. I'd let everyone take care of me because I didn't think I could take care of myself. That was over. I told Olivia to take the case to court. She did. The trial was covered in the local news. The allegations of fraud and emotional abuse made headlines. Mark's business imploded. The shell company was dissolved. The bank accounts were frozen. He was forced to pay back a fraction of what he'd taken, though most of the money was already gone. He lost everything. The house, the business, the respect of people who had trusted him. He lost his marriage, his wife, and his child. Lauren's baby was born in September. Diane sent me a photo, but I didn't look at it. I put the envelope in a drawer with all the other things I couldn't process yet. The child was innocent. I knew that, but I couldn't be part of their lives. Not now, maybe not ever. The year after the divorce was the hardest of my life. I'd lost so much that I didn't know who I was anymore. I spent months just trying to get through the days. Therapy helped. Olivia helped. Time helped in a way. But mostly, I just had to learn how to be alone. I had to learn how to live in my house without the weight of expectation. I had to learn how to make tea without thinking about Lauren's hands bringing me a cup. I had to learn how to fall asleep without the ghost of Mark's voice in the other room. It didn't happen overnight. It happened in small moments. A good night's sleep. An hour in the garden without crying. A conversation with a friend that didn't turn into grief. I started writing again. I'd stopped years ago after the first failed transfer, but now I picked it up again. I wrote about the house and the garden and the way the light came through the window in the morning. I wrote about my grandmother and the pies she used to bake. I wrote about the person I used to be before everything changed. She wasn't gone, she was just waiting. I also met new people. I joined a hiking group and started walking the trails near my house. I volunteered at a local animal shelter and adopted a dog who'd been abandoned. I started small and I built up slowly. There were hard days, days when I wanted to call Mark and scream at him, days when I wanted to call Lauren and try to make things right. Days when I wanted to give up and move somewhere else and never come back. But I stayed. The house was mine, not Mark's, not Lauren's, mine, and I wasn't going to give it up. I went back to the title office once, a year later. The same strip mall, the same fluorescent lights, the same conference room where everything had fallen apart. Mrs. Denton was there, still wearing her reading glasses on a chain. She didn't remember me. I signed some paperwork to finalize the property transfer and went home. It felt like a closure I hadn't known I needed. I started thinking about the future again, not the future I'd planned with Mark. A different one. One I'd build myself. I didn't know what it looked like yet, but I knew I wanted to be part of it. I wanted to travel. I wanted to write a book. I wanted to do something that mattered. I wanted to stop being defined by what I'd lost. I also started thinking about motherhood, not in the immediate sense. I wasn't ready for that, and I didn't know if I ever would be. But I started to realize that there were other ways to build a family, other ways to be a mother, other ways to love and be loved. I didn't have to follow the path I'd planned. I could make a new one. The dog helped. He was a golden retriever mix with a wagging tail and a trusting face. He followed me everywhere and slept at the foot of my bed. He didn't care about my past. He just cared about walks and food and belly rubs. He was the best therapy I'd ever had. Lauren sent me a letter when the baby was 6 months old. She wrote about the child's first steps and first words and all the things she wished I could see. She wrote about how much she'd changed, how sorry she was, how she'd never forgive herself for what she'd done. She wrote about wanting to be a better sister, a better person, a better mother. I didn't respond. I kept the letter in the drawer with the photo and let myself feel the weight of it. I wasn't ready to open that door. Maybe I never would be. But I didn't throw the letter away. I couldn't do that. Mark disappeared from my life completely. The court rulings were final and he had nothing left to take. His business was gone. His reputation was destroyed. He moved out of state and stopped answering his lawyer's calls. I didn't ask where he went. I didn't want to know. The divorce was final in the spring. I spent that summer in the garden, planting vegetables and flowers and things that would grow. It was the first time in years I'd planted anything with intention. Every seed was a promise that I was still here, still trying, still believing that things could get better. I didn't know if they would, but I was willing to try. The garden grew, the dog grew. I grew too, not in the ways I'd expected, but in the ways I'd needed. I learned how to be alone. I learned how to be kind to myself. I learned that I could survive without the people who'd hurt me. And that surviving was the first step toward something better. The guest room had been empty for months. I painted it a light blue and turned it into an office. I hung my grandmother's mirror on the wall and put a desk by the window. Every morning, I sat there and looked out at the garden and wrote. It was small, but it was mine. I started a blog about healing after betrayal. It was anonymous at first, but readers found it anyway. I wrote about the miscarriages and the affair and the way I'd almost let myself disappear. I wrote about the power of reclaiming your own life. The response was overwhelming. Letters poured in from women who'd been through similar things. It wasn't just me. It never had been. I started to wonder if there was more I could do, if I could take my story and use it to help other people. I wasn't sure how yet, but the idea started to feel possible. I also started talking to my mother again. She didn't bring up Lauren, and I didn't ask. We talked about the garden and the dog and the weather. We talked about the small things that made life worth living. It wasn't the same as before, but it was a start. I didn't know if I'd ever be able to forgive Lauren. I didn't know if I wanted to, but I knew I needed to find a way to let go of the anger. Not for her, for me. The last time I saw Mark was in court during the final hearing. He looked older, tired, defeated. The confident man I'd married was gone, replaced by someone who had nothing left to lose. He didn't look at me. I didn't look at him. The judge ruled in my favor, and it was over. I walked out of the courthouse and didn't feel victorious. I just felt tired, but in a good way. The closure I'd been looking for came in unexpected ways. Sometimes I'd be walking the dog and see a couple with a baby, and I'd feel a pang of something. Loss, maybe, or regret, but it wasn't as sharp as it used to be. It was just part of the landscape. I started to realize that healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about accepting. Accepting that Mark and Lauren had done what they'd done. Accepting that I couldn't undo the past. Accepting that I'd been hurt, but I wasn't broken. I could build something new. I didn't have to be defined by what I'd lost. The guest room is my office now. The blue walls are covered in photos and notes. The desk by the window is always covered in paper. It's where I write and where I dream and where I remember that I'm still here. Every morning I sit there and look out at the garden and watch the sun come up. It's not perfect, but it's real and it's mine. The final piece of the puzzle came in the mail 3 weeks after the divorce was finalized. I opened the envelope expecting another legal document, something from Olivia about the last of the asset division. Instead, I found a thumb drive with a sticky note attached in handwriting I didn't recognize at first. "This belongs to you." The note was unsigned. I sat at my desk for a long moment, turning the drive over in my hands, trying to decide whether I wanted to know what was on it. Part of me was exhausted. Part of me was scared. But most of me was curious, and I'd learned that curiosity was usually a sign I needed to pay attention. I plugged the drive into my computer and waited for the files to load. There were 5 of them, audio files labeled with dates that stretched back 18 months. I clicked on the first one and heard my own voice. "I can't do this again. I can't go through another transfer. My body is so tired." It was a recording of a conversation I'd had with Mark after the 3rd miscarriage. I'd been lying in bed, crying, telling him I didn't think I could survive another round. His voice was soft and reassuring, telling me everything would be okay, that he'd take care of everything, that he was going to be there no matter what. The next file was from 6 months later. I sounded more defeated. "I don't want to see anyone. I can't talk to my mom. She doesn't understand why I can't just move on." Mark's voice again, soothing, promising he'd handle the finances so I didn't have to worry about anything. The 3rd file was from the week before I found the ultrasound. I was talking about how I couldn't get out of bed, how everything felt meaningless, how I didn't want to make decisions anymore. Mark told me I didn't have to. He said he'd take care of everything. I'd never heard those conversations from the outside before. Listening to them now, I realized how carefully he'd been setting me up. Every moment of vulnerability, every cry for help, every admission that I couldn't handle my own life anymore, he documented and saved. He was building a case against me. The 4th file was different. It was a conversation between Mark and someone I didn't recognize, a man with a deep voice who asked a lot of questions about my mental state. Mark told him I'd been diagnosed with depression, that I was on medication, that I'd been hospitalized for emotional exhaustion. None of it was true. I'd seen a therapist for a few months after the 2nd miscarriage, but I'd never been hospitalized. I'd never been diagnosed with anything beyond normal grief. The lies were layered so deep that Mark had started to believe them himself. The 5th file was the one that made my stomach drop. It was Mark's voice, speaking alone. I guessed he'd recorded himself on his phone. "After another failed transfer, she won't fight me. Once the power of attorney is signed, I can control the accounts and move the equity before she understands what happened. I'd heard this before. Lauren had played it for me at the title office. But hearing it without her voice, without the chaos of the confrontation, I realized what it meant. Mark had planned this for years. He'd been waiting for the right moment, the right emotional state, the right set of circumstances that would make me sign anything. The miscarriages weren't just tragedies, they were opportunities. Every loss I'd endured had been a step in his plan. He'd comforted me, held me, promised me everything, all while counting down to the moment he could take it all away. I sat at my desk for a long time after the files ended. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I just sat there and let the weight of it settle over me. It was the worst kind of betrayal. Not just the affair, not just the financial theft, but the way he'd used my grief. The way he'd turned my losses into tools for his own gain. The way he'd made me believe I was being loved when I was actually being prepared for destruction. I saved the files on multiple devices. Then I emailed Olivia and asked her to file a formal complaint with the court regarding the recordings. It wouldn't change the outcome of the divorce, but it would add to the record. It would make sure that if anyone ever looked into Mark's history, they'd see exactly who he was. I spent the next few days in a kind of fog. I went through the motions of my life, walking the dog, watering the garden, cooking meals. I didn't eat. The recordings played on a loop in my head, and I couldn't stop thinking about all the times I'd trusted Mark, all the times I'd been grateful for his support, all the times. I'd thought he was the only person who truly understood me. He'd understood me. He'd just used that understanding against me. A week later, I got an email from Lauren. I know you don't want to talk to me, and I understand. But I needed you to know that Mark's attorney has reached out to me. They want me to testify in the fraud case. I'm going to do it. I'm going to tell them everything. I read the email 3 times. Then I went to the garden and pulled weeds until my hands were sore. I didn't know what to say to her. She'd been part of the betrayal. She'd helped plan the takeover. She'd sat beside me while I lost his baby and pretended to care. But she was also the one who'd given me the recordings. She'd told me about the financial plan when she didn't have to. She'd made the choices she'd made, but she was making different ones now. I wrote back the next day. Thank you for telling me. I can't talk to you yet, but I wanted you to know I appreciate it. It was the first message I'd sent her since the coffee shop. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a step. I wasn't ready to open the door, but I was willing to crack it. The trial for the fraud case didn't happen. Mark settled out of court, admitting to the financial theft but denying the allegations of emotional abuse and forgery. It was a settlement, not a verdict, and it left a lot unresolved. But the damage to his reputation was done. The local paper wrote an article about the case, and the details were brutal. I didn't read it. Olivia summarized it for me, and that was enough. I didn't need to see the headlines. I just needed to know it was over. Mark's company folded a month later. The shell accounts were dissolved. The money he'd stolen was gone, spent on debts and payments and things I'd never know about. I got some of it back. Not all, but enough. Enough to rebuild. Enough to move forward. I didn't hear from Mark after the settlement. I'd stopped expecting anything from him. He was gone, and the part of me that had loved him was gone too. It was strange to realize that I didn't hate him. I didn't love him either. I just didn't feel anything at all. That was the real healing, I think. Not forgiveness, not forgetting, just a lack of feeling. The person who'd hurt me had become irrelevant. I didn't need to punish him. I didn't need to forgive him. I just needed to let him go. I started working on a book about the experience. It was a way of processing, but also a way of giving back. I'd spent so many hours wishing I had someone to talk to, someone who understood what it was like to lose everything. And still find a way to keep going. I wanted to be that person for someone else. The book was hard to write. Every chapter brought up memories I'd rather forget. But I kept going because it felt important. I kept going because I'd learned that avoiding the truth never made it go away. The only way out was through. I mentioned Lauren once in the book, not by name. I just wrote about a sister who'd been part of the story, who'd made choices I couldn't forgive but didn't want to hate. I wrote about the complexity of love and loyalty and betrayal. I wrote about how the people closest to you can be the ones who hurt you most. I also wrote about the house, the garden, the dog, the little things that had saved me. I wrote about how the light in the guest room was different after I turned it into an office, how the color on the walls made me feel calm, how I'd finally learned to live alone and be okay with it. The book was published a year later. It did well, which surprised me. I hadn't expected anyone to care about my story. But it turns out there are a lot of people who have been through similar things who need to know they're not alone. I got letters from women who'd been betrayed by their partners, who'd been manipulated and lied to and stolen from. I got letters from women who were trying to rebuild their lives after everything fell apart. I got letters from mothers and daughters and sisters who were trying to find a way back to each other. I answered everyone. I didn't have solutions. I didn't have answers. But I had the truth, and sometimes that was enough. The house became a place of healing, not just for me, but for other people. I started hosting small gatherings for women who were going through the same kind of recovery. We sat in the garden and talked about our losses and our hopes and the things we were learning. It wasn't therapy. It was connection. It was the thing I'd been missing all along. I didn't get back together with Mark. I didn't even consider it. I also didn't get back together with Lauren. I talked to her occasionally, messages that were polite but distant. She had her own life now, her own child, her own struggles. I didn't want to be part of that story. Not yet. Maybe someday, but not now. The last time I saw Lauren was at my mother's house a few years later. The baby was a toddler, running around the living room with a stuffed animal in each hand. Lauren looked tired and happy and like she was trying very hard to be a good mother. I watched her for a moment and I didn't feel anger. I just felt distance. The distance of someone who'd been hurt and had learned to protect herself. Lauren saw me looking and came over. "Thank you for coming. I didn't come for you. I know, but I'm glad you're okay." "I'm getting there," she said. "How's the book?" "Good, people are reading it." "That's great." She hesitated. "I read it." I didn't answer. "I knew you wouldn't put me in it, not by name, but I kept wondering if you'd write about me." "I wrote about the betrayal." "I know." She looked down at her hands. "I didn't expect you to forgive me. But I wanted you to know that I've changed, that I'm trying to be better." I looked at her for a long moment. "I believe you. Does that mean you forgive me?" "No," I said. "It means I believe you're trying, and that's a start." She nodded and went back to the baby. I watched them together for a few minutes, and I felt something shift inside me, not forgiveness, but maybe acceptance. The understanding that we were both broken, and we were both trying to put the pieces back together. I walked home from my mother's house. The sun was setting, and the sky was pink and orange in that way it only is in autumn. I thought about everything that had happened, all the pain and the loss and the betrayal, and I thought about how far I'd come. The guest room was still my office. The garden was still growing. The dog was still sleeping at the foot of my bed, and I was still here, still alive, still trying to make something new out of the wreckage. I didn't know what the future held. But for the first time in a long time, I was excited to find out. I thought about the ultrasound sometimes. It was still in Olivia's evidence file, sealed and labeled, waiting for a case that had already been closed. I never asked for it back. I didn't need to hold on to it anymore. It wasn't the proof of my betrayal. It was the proof of my survival. Lauren had placed it in that car to destroy my marriage, but it had done the opposite. It had set me free. The day I found that ultrasound was the last day I believed in the life mark and Lauren had built around me. But it was also the first day I started building a life of my own. I've never been more grateful for anything. About a year after the book came out, I received a voice message from an unknown number. I almost didn't listen to it, but something made me press play. It was Mark's voice, older and more hollow than I remembered. Rachel, I know I have no right to contact you, but I wanted to say I'm sorry, not because I expect anything. Just because I hope you're okay. I listened to it twice, then deleted it. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I just didn't want his voice in my head anymore. That was the last I ever heard from him. Lauren sent me a text a few weeks later. Mark left, you got what you wanted. I stared at the message for a long time. She was trying to make me feel guilty, to make me believe I'd somehow caused the destruction of her relationship. But I knew better. I'd never wanted Mark. I'd never wanted her pain. I just wanted my life back. I typed my reply slowly. I never wanted your life. I wanted mine back. Then I blocked her number. It was the last conversation we ever had. I kept the guest room as my office, and I used the desk by the window to write about everything that had happened. It took me years to process it all, and even now, there are days when it feels too heavy to carry. But I'm learning to put it down, to let it go, to believe that the best parts of my life are still ahead of me. The ultrasound is sealed in the evidence file, a relic of a time I don't visit anymore. I don't need to see it to remember what happened, but I also don't need to hold on to the pain. I've finally learned to let that go too. Healing is not about forgetting. It's about accepting. Accepting that people can hurt you and you can still survive. Accepting that loss doesn't have to define you. Accepting that the worst day of your life can also be the day you finally start living for yourself. That's what the ultrasound taught me. Not that I was betrayed, but that I was strong enough to survive it. Not that my sister failed me, but that I didn't need her to be whole. Not that my marriage ended, but that my life was just beginning. The guest room is a different place now. It's not a room for recovery or betrayal or loss. It's a room for writing, for dreaming, for building something new. And every morning when I sit at the desk and watch the sun come up over the garden, I'm grateful for the person I've become. Not because I didn't suffer, but because I didn't let the suffering define me. That's the real victory. Not revenge, not justice, just the quiet, everyday act of continuing to live when everything told you to give up. I hope someone reading this understands. I hope someone who's been hurt knows that the worst day of their life doesn't have to be the last chapter. You can write a new one. I did.